about the impacts of the project, and then we will have a small presentation from ICRA Finance on how the finances were and how efficient that we have been in this project. So I think I'm going to ask for your indulgence to let a few more people join in, because I'm seeing more people coming in. And then we allow Sola to start the presentation at 11:05. Is that okay? Or do we just go on? When I started talking, we had 26 participants, 5 more have come in. So maybe I see how the flow goes up to 5:05. Now, because we are quite many, we'll not be able to introduce ourselves, and I can see quite a number of new people. So we will have the presentations running for 1 hour, and then we'll have a Q&A session of 30 minutes. And when that time comes and you're asking a question, kindly introduce yourself, who you are, who you're working for, what you do over there, and your relationship with DryDev, and then you can ask your question. It feels really bad that I cannot have all of you talk, but I hope at that point I'll be able to have quite a number of you talk. I'll be looking at the chat line, and I can already see you, Salamatu. Thank you so much. It's been a while, but that was only to me privately. But I'll be looking at the chat, so that if you have anything to raise along the way, I can be able to capture it, and maybe in between presentations, we can record that. So kindly feel free to write up anything on the chat. Hello? Is somebody talking? Okay, so we are now at 36, and we still have 1 more minute. I think by that time we'll be getting to 40. It is now my pleasure to allow Sola to come on board and present on the journey of DryDev. Sola, are you ready?
I'm trying to.
You're trying to be ready. How many seconds do you want to get? I see you there. You don't need more seconds. You may want to share the presentation. Share your screen.
Sorry, no?
No, I don't see it yet.
Oh.
I hope the dog did not eat your homework, Sola.
I'm trying to, but I don't know what's going on, why it's not sharing.
It depends on which part of the world you are. Okay, it's coming now. We can see it. It's on now. Okay. Get on, Sola. Welcome.
Okay. Right, there we go. Good morning, everyone, colleagues, friends, partners. Nice to meet you again, and those that we have not met. I've prepared a very long presentation. DryDev was a very long program. So I am Posiso Sola. I was or maybe still is, the East Africa coordinator for DryDev. So I'm going to take you through the journey of DryDev from August 2013 to July 2019. The presentation is quite long, but I just want to make the information available to you. I will fly through most of the slides, and then people can have them later. But just to share, because I need to fly between the countries, the Sahel, East Africa, Ethiopia. Even if it's COVID, I'll try and fly between them. And I also need to visit some of the sites. So it's quite a long presentation. Just to kickstart, I would like to really acknowledge that this was a 6-year program where ICRAF was the implementing agency, working with a consortium of 21 NGOs who are highlighted there. Some of them exited midway, the project highlighted in red, but this was a big, strong consortium that worked on this program in the countries listed on that table. And really, we set out to try and ensure that households residing in the arid areas in those countries transition from emergency subsistence to rural development by promoting water security, food security, strengthen the local economy, and so on. We did this in 110 sites, and I can attest we were 110 plus staff that were deployed on this project in the 5 countries. Really, this was informed by farmers. We tried to make sure that there was integration of all activities in one site in order to prepare for scaling. Just to take you through the journey, 2013 to 2019 was a very long, bumpy road, but somehow we managed to get there. So what happened? We had a shortish inception phase, but in that inception phase, what we did was implementing quick wins. And that was not so well coordinated and so well organized. So we went into another bridge phase. And in this bridge phase, really implementation slowed down. If you look at the blue graph, which shows how the level of implementation was, it really went down, but it gave us time to rethink the program, put a new theory of change, new programming framework that catalyzed a lot of work. But and also this was the time when we actually integrated research or integrated action learning into the program. And by June 2015 to December 2015, implementation started. Still, the fieldwork was low, but we started to move at a more systematic pace and a more coordinated way in order to really implement the project to get to the vision using the theory of change that was set up. And by 2018, the program was in full swing. We really had lots of plant comparison or action research. We managed to reach just over 70% of our targets. And by the time we exited, we really had improved implementation. But what you can see from this journey is that most implementation was in the last 3 years of the project. And that has had a lot of bearing on what was achieved and on what was scaled out as we go through. But in terms of most of the targets, you'll see we're almost 80% above. This project was guided by some principles and approaches that we adopted. One thing, this was farmer-led and touching on farmer priorities. So we had a lot of community engagement, vision setting, identification of options, and prioritizing those options. With those options, we then synthesized what would be the learning priorities. What could we do better? What information do we have? What knowledge should we create in order to sharpen and improve the quality of delivery? And we call that the action learning or the research phase of the project. That was integrated to actually improve quality of delivery. And still, we were really looking at our core values of bottom-up process, leveraging strategic partners, engaging many partners to work with us, and integration on site. This was then the basis for us to develop implementation plans, which we re-looked at in 2015 to 2016, informing the rest of the implementation phase. So after having done that, I just want to give you an overview of the numbers of farmers that we work with and how far we went through the journey. As you can see from these numbers, it gives you the curve of the journey, that when we started in 2014, we had farmers that were less than 50,000. But by the time we go to 2015, we started really engaging more farmers. And when the project ended in July 2019, we had reached 97% of the target of 228,000 farmers. And most of these farmers, most of the countries actually managed to almost reach their targets. You can see that in Niger, we're with over 50,000 farmers.
Yeah, it's the webinar.
Yeah.
And then I'm talking to somebody, Susan Onyango. From
Burkina Faso managed to reach over 41,000. And those were really close to the targets that were set. So we managed to engage all the farmers that we intended to engage. The interesting things on these two graphs is the number of women. The program made great efforts to reach the number of women, but they were always less than 50% in most of the countries. But countries like Kenya and others tried to reach more than 50% of 50% of farmers as women. But that's one down thing that we'll talk later about in the program, about really ensuring that gender issues are integrated into the program. So this program was organized into 8 work packages, which was sub-catchment management, climate smart agriculture, on-farm water and soil management, enhancing market access, financial services linking, local governance and institutional development, planning, monitoring and learning. I left out the policy influencing because the numbers, in terms of tracking the numbers engaged, it wasn't well done, which is something that we need to acknowledge, so that the numbers, they couldn't be put on the graph. But what I want to show you is that most of the farmers we worked with were engaged in sub-catchment management. That's the blue graph. So we really engaged most of the farmers. You can see it's actually more than 163,000 of the farmers out of the 219 that we met. So and then also on farm and soil water conservation, the issues of financial access, market linkages, they were lagging behind later, but we were using them to catalyze the processes. They were not supposed to be deep process, but if 3 farmers are linked to markets, they are likely to actually impact more than 50 farmers in their surroundings. So that's why those numbers are lagging behind, but that was the intention from the beginning. And then we had 6 outcomes that we're working towards within the Bureau of Change. So I want to give you some snapshots of what we achieved in those 6 outcomes. I'm not going to detail the activities we did, but really what results and outcomes we managed to achieve. So in the first outcome, which was looking at the increasing water capture in sub-catchment and on farm, we managed to engage more than 164,000 farmers, and these 164,000 farmers worked on 163 hectares of land, putting improved natural resource management practice. And just like the journey we had, you can see that the number of farmers engaged as well as the land that was managed increased almost as along that journey that we had. But a few observations that we saw is that national water management strategies that were already in place at the beginning of the project in Ethiopia really catalyzed the work and facilitated our work in Ethiopia, and more than the other countries that didn't have a water management strategy. And then when we came to Kenya, it took longer to even start working on natural resource management because of private land holding and unclear policy framework that could be used to facilitate this process. So it actually took longer, and you can see that Kenya only contributed 13.4 hectares into this achievement. And also the long-standing history of FMNR in Niger also played a part in catalyzing some of the achievements we had in this outcome. Just to show you some of the technologies that were used, or some of the works that the communities were involved in, just in the 3 Sahel countries, we have over 100 hectares that was rehabilitated to facilitate agro-pastoral areas in those 3 countries using different technologies and techniques. I'm just showing a few there. And Ethiopia was one success story in terms of the watershed management. I've already said we had already an existing framework that made it easy for us to work. For instance, just in one side, I think I've shown this many times. I like this picture from Sejamba, where it shows how you can actually do treatment in the upland and ensure that the downstream people are actually benefiting. So you have lots of biological treatment, rainwater harvesting upland, but at the bottom, Then we had improved agricultural productivity using irrigation, and also improved grass production for cut and carry grazing. So we had many, this is just one of the sites, but we have many such sites in Ethiopia where we managed to improve sub-catchment water management. Just to show also, we did some work to manage riverine ecosystems in Burkina Faso and in Kenya. And this was one of the ecosystems, as you can see in the first picture there. This is where we started, but this is where we ended, with people being engaged using different practices to stabilize the riverbanks and improve vegetation. So the 20 hectares of riverine land was improved for 24,000 agro-pastoralists in Burkina Faso in Kian site. And in Kenya, we had a similar story of improving riverine ecosystems using through digging trenches, seed boring, and FMNR. You can see we started with almost a bare land, but with all these works, in the end, there was a productive sand dam at the end as part of this system, which provided livestock water to 900 households and 13,000 livestock and a bit of micro irrigation. So all that sub-water catchment management led to productive agricultural systems. We also worked on improving grazing in all the countries, but I'll just give you two examples. So you start with the bare land, and then you engage in grass seeding. For instance, this is a site in Sambwe in Ethiopia with 42 hectares. In the end, you have all this grass that is produced, and with the cut and carry system, farmers manage to engage in the milk production, improved fattening, and so on, just by improving this sub-catchment management system. In Makueni, people also were engaged in rehabilitating or restoring an ecosystem, and they also planted grasses with grass seeding. They managed to support, it's actually 110 women who then embarked on goat fattening and goat breeding. They managed to improve their sales because their local goat was selling for $40, but with this system of improved fodder, they managed to have a breed that was selling for $150 per kid. So that sub-catchment management, improving income generating, improving also livestock production. We invested a lot also in tree planting. Actually, we planted 4.6 million trees across the 5 countries. And again, the number of trees went along that journey that we took from 2014 to 2019. Incidentally, 72% of these trees were planted in Ethiopia. And about 13% and so on were planted in the other countries. And one thing that we also invested in was to improve survival of these trees. We did plant comparisons in Ethiopia, in Burkina, in Mali, and in Kenya to actually improve survival of trees through layering, through grafting, but also just changing the management techniques of mulching and watering at different times. So we still believe these trees would have survived by now. So that's really the story of the sub-catchment management. And I want to briefly go through the story of improving climate smart production of commodities and food crops. One thing that was key here was water buffering. It was a game changer in these drylands for food production. Just there I'm showing you water buffering in Niger, which was used for gardening, starting with the degraded area, but putting water buffering infrastructure that led to farmers engaging in gardening. We have many of those stories across all the countries, but I'll just mention a few. In the end, we had 953 rainwater harvesting and storage units across the 5 countries, and 53 million farmers participated in irrigation, and on 12,000 were women. And this irrigation was done on 16,000 hectares of land across the farmers. Again, 70% of this irrigation land is in Ethiopia. Using that sub-catchment management system that I showed you, we managed to actually have bigger areas of land of irrigation in Ethiopia, from treating the uplands and making sure the lowlands are productive for irrigation and other vegetation production. But Kenya and Burkina Faso also have 13% of that 16,000 hectares of irrigation. Farmers grew many crops, engaging on 2 cycles of crops, and this doubled their yield, especially in Ethiopia and Kenya. This is another example of a water buffering infrastructure in Kitui in Kenya, where a sand dam was constructed and provided water up to 500 meters away, where people could dig shallow wells and have small gardens and also provide water for their livestock. And many other water buffering systems, but one thing that was also a game changer was the farm pond or the farm well, whichever way you design it, but really having a farm pond. This extended the period in which water was available for the crops. It also doubled cropping cycles in some instances, and it facilitated the engagement of more women and more youth. You can see the youth were more amenable to, a treadle pump, drip irrigation, and so on. So this was also one of the game changers we had in buffering. But then we also had large-scale infrastructure which needed more resources. And we saw this happening a lot in Ethiopia, where the partnership with the government and the IPs that leverage on their programs, we had many check dams being constructed. You can see the amount of work needed and the technical skills required. Most of this was beyond the DryDev and the DryDev team, and we had to leverage that from the partners and from the Warrior government. Besides water buffering, the other key issue was soil and water conservation that was introduced and facilitated within the program, where we had almost 150 farmers actually participating in this soil and water conservation activities, putting 105 hectares of land under this option. And you can see that still the graph is the same as the journey. The women are still lagging behind. We have almost high now, we have 149,000 farmers there, but women are just about 30%, 38% of the farmers achieved. So we still had that lagging, and this was attributed to many issues of decision making, land access, and labor availability that women are already engaged in many other activities. But looking at all the farmers, the 219,000 farmers that we reached, 55% of them did engage in soil and water conservation. Although, and we had more of them in Burkina and Niger. We had more land being put under soil and water conservation in Burkina and Kenya. And if we look at land put under crop per farmer, we had more in Ethiopia and Kenya, where farmers put slightly more land under soil and water conservation than the countries in the Sahel. One technology that we really think was a game changer as well, and it cut across East Africa and the Sahel, was the ZyPit technology. It assured harvest for most farmers. Not so sure if it increased the harvest, the yields that much, but it really assured that even when there is crop failure, farmers can harvest something. So we had this technology being facilitated a lot, and farmers were really excited and engaged in it. In Kenya, they even increased them to make them zygrapes instead of just zypits. And a study was conducted both in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Kenya to see how effective this technology is using the plant comparison approach that we had. And you can see that one of the sizes of the zypits at the bottom there actually led to increased high mean yields for 315 farmers, and compared to the others. So we really believe that it assured harvest and also increased yields to some extent for some of the farmers. then in really looking at those farmers that actually practiced climate smart agricultural practices, most of those peaked in 2018, where about 125 farmers participated and 89,000 farmers applied. There are some people participated in meetings, in information sharing events, but at the end of the day, 89,000 farmers really practiced the climate smart production on 60,500 hectares across the 5 countries. So there was a lot of engagement in climate smart production, which we are attributing to better yields, and also we are attributing to more consistent production in the crop fields. Just to show you some of the fields where climate smart production was applied, and this included getting the right seed for the right area, getting the right seed for the right season, but also applying the soil and water conservation technologies and integrating trees, as well as bringing in the livestock into the production system. Yeah. Now, we envisaged that when we increase the production of commodities, farmers will engage more in value chains to generate income. And this is what we got. That many farmers were engaged in the information sharing. With that blue graph there, many farmers were engaged in the information sharing, but slightly less farmers were engaged in the sale of the various commodities. For instance, we have 81,000 farmers engaged in various value chains, of which 40% of the farmers, which make 40% of all the farmers that we work with, and 33 of the women that we work with were engaged in the value chains. But of the 81,000, 71,000 were actually engaged in producing the commodities for the different value chains, and 50,000 actually did sell something. So you see the figures are lower as you go through the production, marketing, and so on system. And this we attributed to that most farmers produced commodities for food consumption more than for selling. But we see that more people were engaged in selling in Ethiopia and Burkina Faso than the other countries. Maybe just to show that we had 32% of the 32 value chains developed, and those were the different value chains. And you can see Ethiopia, Kenya, and Burkina had slightly more value chains, that were more successful value chains, not just the value chains. And those are the numbers that I was talking about people who got engaged in producing and those that actually sold some of the commodities. These are some of the people and some of the commodities that were managed to be sold across the different countries, from potatoes to shea butter, goats and chickens, millet and onions, and haricot bean in Ethiopia, as well as honey. So across many countries, we also had honey in Ethiopia, but just to, and honey in the other countries, but just to show you a snapshot of some of the commodities. What actually facilitated participation in some of the value chains was actually financial linkages, being able to access credit, or that also constrained people being able to participate in the different value chains. So of the 219,000 farmers that we worked with, 63,000 actually participated in improving financial literacy, and and this was a big increase from 2015. We facilitated linkages with various MFIs, and 1.6 million was actually accessed in loans, and 60,500 farmers actually started saving. With increased literacy, farmers started saving. But when we look at the graphs, you find that actually the farmers that were saving were still slightly less than the farmers that were accessing loans. And if you look at the amount of the saving that farmers managed to do, it's still far less than the figure or the value or the amount of loans that were accessed. So there was still a little bit of more work to do to try and bring the two graphs a little bit closer so that farmers are not always in debt.
You got 5 minutes, Sola.
Okay. Can you make it 10? I'm about to run off.
Let's work with 5, then we will give you grace.
Okay. So in order for farmers to be able to engage in the project and also to be able to increase their negotiation capacity and so on, we invested in improving farmer organizations. And we can see that at the start, we really had very few farmer organizations, but the number of farmers that were engaged in farmer organizations increased over time. And this actually facilitated the service delivery, the extension systems that were put in place, or catalyzed the farmer-to-farmer extension system. So we also built capacity of the lead farmers because they were key in this farmer-to-farmer extension system. And these are some of the changes that farmer organization leaders effected after that improvement or after that transformational leadership, coaching and training for the different groups so that they can improve their performance. The other thing that we did was working with the farmer organizations and also having ICRAF taking a lead. We invested a lot in multi-stakeholder sharing and learning of evidence of what works for who, where, with what and with who. So these were the plant comparison or other action learning activities that we undertook across the various countries, which I will not have time to get into, but we had many meetings that were conducted. And those meetings were supposed to feed into a situation where more or a critical mass of development actors are motivated to take up some of the technologies. So we managed to engage about 350 scaling stakeholders or people who are potentially able to take up and scale out the program. But we went as far as identifying the opportunities and the potential for scaling and really didn't engage and work with the scaling stakeholders to see whether really DryDev interventions have been scaled out or how they've been scaled out and how that has happened. That we couldn't do because this activity was done almost towards the end of the project. The other outcome was really about improving policy or influencing policy. This was not really a big component of the project, but we really tried to organize people, facilitate them to lobby change, produce policy brief. For instance, in the Sahel, it was mostly about land tenure, whereas in Kenya, it was really about this land holding, private land holding to facilitate sub-catchment management. So I'll try and then share what are the lessons and the insights that we think we got from the program. We believe that options by context allows people to engage. It allows promotion of locally suited interventions and builds the confidence of the farmers. They feel they own the process and sharpens the delivery. One thing we saw was that the funding for the research or for the action learning is critical because integration of this is contingent on funding availability, and limited funds really constrained the generation of the evidence and the scaling, as I've already highlighted. We already have less than 50% of the people engaged in several interventions being women. We think that I think we should have had a more proactive, a more concerted effort on social inclusion strategy, and that's something that we recommend for any future program. One other lesson learned is that consortium performance is really contingent on meticulous partner selection. It is very critical. For you to deliver on this, innovative delivery requires capacity, it needs learning, it needs ability, willingness to adapt and to change. And we struggled with that a bit within DryDev, also with limited staffing. We had one staff person deployed in the whole sub-catchment. We also hoped that DryDev will sit and benefit from the different organizations deliver infrastructure, but we didn't see that happening in all the organizations. DryDev was treated as a separate unit, therefore it really didn't benefit a lot from the various organization experiences and so on. I think the other part is really about governance and oversight. We think that's very important. On a three-tier system, roles and responsibility and resources should go accordingly. We also, as we have said, the extended inception phase constrained the implementation period. So even if we go to the impact assessment, we are only assessing impact of really 3 years, when the first 2 years were really dedicated to inception. We want to acknowledge that sub-national governance systems can actually make an ultimate system. We really saw the contribution of the government in Ethiopia, that it catalyzed work. Whereas when you came to Kenya with the younger devolution, remember when DryDev started, it was when devolution started. So you had younger devolution, and therefore you didn't have the same kind of support, and that made a difference. But still, there was more support than we got from the sub-national systems in the Sahel, and that could have made a difference between the two regions of the various countries, where then the extension system actually fails. Land tenure should also be looked at, because it might influence how the strategies are adopted, especially for water, catchment management. Where do you put in the unit? Yeah, let me just skip that. So my last slide is that takeaway message from DryDev is that conceptual tailoring, bottom-up processes, co-learning approaches, enhance farmer and stakeholder interaction. I remember in one site when we went after the community action planning, they said, this is the first time we have actually told an extension officer what we think. So that process really gave that confidence and increased that interaction. And generating evidence on what works well is critical for learning and adoption, especially in mega projects. One size fits all doesn't work anymore. There's just a lot of variation, social, economic, and biofiscal variation that has to be taken into account. And successful scaling requires massive local participation with enduring local institutions like farmer organizations, government, strategic partners, but really resources that are adequate to facilitate these processes. Merci beaucoup. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Sola. I think trying to fit in 6 years of work into 30 minutes can never be easy, but I think you've cracked it quite well. So we gave you another grace of 3 minutes. And I would like to ask everyone to just note down your questions, because if we start taking them now, we may get disoriented, so that we can give Judith some time. So kindly just write your questions to Sola on your notebooks, wherever you are, then we'll have some time to do a conversation. In the meantime, Sola, maybe you may want to be stopping to sharing your screen so that Judith can begin to share.
This thing is torturing me. I don't even know where I'm supposed to do this.
Just go to where you are sharing and stop sharing.
That's all.
Great. So as Judith comes, trying to see her on my list, but I know she's there. As Judith, Judith, could you kindly start sharing your screen? Just wanted to report that the DryDev Kenya team has been having a WhatsApp group, and we have been seeing a lot of feedback from farmers that DryDev is very much alive in Kenya, and I believe it's very much alive in the other countries. Kindly move to slideshow, Judith. And so this has been a very exciting project that we have seen a lot of work going on. And I think more and more can be captured from what happened since we closed. But for now, let's hear from the impacts that Judith has to report. And then when we come into the discussions, we are quite a number of the 110 members of staff that participated in this project that are on the call. And so they'll be able to also tell us what it is that they're experiencing from the field. Take it away, Judith. And you have 25 minutes.
Okay. Just a minute. I have 25 minutes. Okay, good morning, good afternoon. I think people are in different time zones. So I will share with you, okay, solar has alluded to lots of changes, lots of interventions, interactions going on. So what I want to share with you today are just some of the impacts that have manifested as a result of the interventions that various implementing countries did, the interventions that were interacted. So I will Okay, so I will be speaking more to the slide on, so solar has talked a lot on the activities and the outputs. So I will be talking more on how the impacts have manifested in terms of outputs, so what we promised. So if you can see the slide that I'm speaking through, I will be looking at some of the impacts, how the interventions have impacted on maybe water capture, for example, production, access to extension, and the longer term impacts like women empowerment, resilience, livelihood resilience, and the lower impacts bit long term and are tied to policy change, the policy influencing. So I will not have slides to explain to that. So I will be talking about the first four. Increased water capture, there's just a little of it in terms of adoption, and then, so the next, so what we did with the impact evaluation is that at the beginning of just before the project started, we collected baseline data, and then at the end of the project, again in 2019, we went and collected what we call endline data. So we are using two-time data sets. That is the longitudinal data sets are the baseline and the endline. And then we are looking at the change that has happened in both sites. So we had two groups, the intervention, the ones that were exposed to the intervention, the activities were undertaken in those sites, and then we had a comparison group. So we are using an approach that is called difference in difference, and with this we think sometimes is more superior to just looking at the changes in the before and after, because it helps us also to net out the differences as a result of we can actually confidently attribute the changes to the project or the interventions when we use the difference in difference. So we just get the difference in the intervention side, the intervention group, and the difference in the comparison group. Then we again look at we net out the difference. So that gain or loss is what we call the impact. So in this slide, we collected quite a large data set. At the baseline, we had a big sample, and this was expected, but then at the end line, the sample sizes dropped drastically. As you can see, we had a very big dropout of about 45 to 40% in Mali and Niger. Okay, for Niger, it's explained by the fact that the partner pulled out of the project, so we didn't have almost 400. And then there was also a lot of insecurity in the two sites in Mali and Niger, so we were not able to reach all the sites to collect the data. That's why you see a drop in the sample size, and that sort of affects also the findings. The sample attrition in Burkina Faso, Ethiopia, and Kenya is not that bad. It's about 19%. And this was because of, some people may have, died, some may have moved out. So that was expected, is usually expected. And that's why it's better to get a reasonable sample size. And I'm skip that slide. It's just talking about the balance between the comparison and the intervention group. So before I get to the results, I organized the results looking at what I call the short-term interventions, the short-term outcomes, then medium-term, the intermediate, and then long-term outcomes, so long-term indicators. So in the very short-term indicators, these are indicators manifest very fast, especially after 1 year. We are likely to see farmers change their behavior and start taking up some of the soil and water conservation practices that Sola alluded to in her presentation. So when we look at the short term, we see impacts manifesting differently in different subgroups and in different countries, but we see a lot of it manifesting more in the short term indicators that don't require a lot of time and do not require a lot of time to show. For example, when we get to the natural resource management related indicators like productivity, market outcome that is also closely related, and probably environmental resilience, you see that we do not see any impacts. So in the solar, I did talk about the various soil and water conservation practices that were promoted in different countries. Each country chose whichever indicator or whatever soil and water management option that they thought was suited for their country, and that is what was promoted. So some of them selected ZIPITs, for example, in Kenya. Others continued with the farmer managed natural regeneration. There was also water harvesting that was supposed to actually fertilize the value chain component. So, well, when we look at the data critically, we realize that there's some impact in adoption of soil and water conservation practices that is lumped together. So in each of the households we looked at, in the intervention side, for example, we see that there's actually the likelihood that for the interventions or the interaction that took place in those sites, farmers are likely to take up intervention. Although the change is small, is likely, the magnitude is small, it's just 2 percentage points. But we see a lot of it in Ethiopia, and we don't see that kind of change in other countries, for example. So what the message that you will get here is that the changes, actually the impacts manifested differently for different countries, different subgroups. So in some countries, you realize there's an impact, and even for some indicators. But when we look at the core that was the integrated, because farmers were already taking up soil and water management practices anyway. If you look at, the graph I didn't show, we had almost everyone practicing some form of soil and water management conservation. But when the core that was integratedness, where we expected farmers to at least integrate maybe some soil and water conservation structures with maybe water harvesting or soil fertility management, we don't see any impact in that. And in most cases, we see in some countries, we see there's an increase, but when we look at the end line survey, we realize that there was a general decline, but the decline actually is reported in both sides, which means, okay, when you look at the statistics, it tells us that that decline actually has nothing to do with the project. It could have been just the general trends that were happening at that time, the year that we collected data. So we will still have work to do in terms of integrated soil and water management options. But when we look at extension, I think this is where at least most farmers had a confidence. Of course, we see low numbers. Some countries, for example, Ethiopia started at a very high, 70% were accessing extension services. And then we see again a decline, but again, the decline is more in all across the sites. Then a country like Kenya, for example, had very limited access to extension services and even confidence in the extension service itself. But after the intervention, we see a change. Of course, the change is more significant in the intervention side. So generally, we could conclude that there was more, the impact was higher for extension. More farmers were able to access extension services, and this could be attributed to the project interventions in all the countries except Niger. Niger, we know that it had lots of issues with the approach. They started at the beginning. By the time we had advised that the approach be restructured, it was already too late, and there were also issues with managing partners. And when we look at the farmer organization functioning here, we do not see any significant change. But again, there was also a lot of fluidity in terms of, farmer groups. And yeah, so that's the table I've been spoken to. We see significant change, and this change is actually higher in Mali and Burkina Faso, and a little, slightly, just 7% change in Kenya. And when we look at now the medium-term indicators, that is the productivity-related indicators, and these are related to, okay, the hypothesis was that more farmers will take up soil and water management practices or water harvesting practices, and then this would increase productivity, and through increased productivity, we would see more farmers actually selling more of the surplus that is generated. But then looking at the graphs, we see, well, generally at the baseline, the figures were higher in most countries. Where we see an increase in the gross value of crops, produced. Okay, this is just a composite indicator because we could have still produced, if we could have used the raw physical indicators like kilograms per hectare, for example, but then because we had different countries with different crops, we decided to use a price to aggregate. So in all the countries at the end line, we see a decline except in Ethiopia. But then again, this change is not significant. So the adoption, it looks like there seems to be more need for more time for the impacts to manifest. By the time, intervention started around 2016, and then in 2019, we are collecting data. Some sites were completely degraded and needed time to recover. So, and then tied to increase in productivity is also an increase in market participation. So we look at market participation here in terms of, the number of farmers actually selling any particular crop, not necessarily prioritized crops. I will speak to you about the prioritized crops in the next slide. But then we see that we focus more on crops here. We have not presented data on the other value chains, livestock related value chains. And then we see, looking at Ethiopia that had almost half of their value chains and crop, we see that Ethiopia generally, the indicators for market participation is quite low. And that is for all the crops. And then we also, because there are few farmers still selling, we see that the value that is sold, actually the change in the value sold is very small for all the countries, of course, except Mali. But for Mali, it's more of a, because of their land sizes are quite large, and then they have also a diversity of crops that farmers produce. So generally, again, we don't see the impacts manifesting in terms of, output sold. And then when we look at the prioritized value chains, which again, Sol alluded to, I looked at only the crop value chains. So we see Ethiopia is really significantly small, the number selling or participating in production. And this is because the crop value chains that were selected for the two impact sites, that is jasmine and samri, they were not very popular crops, but they were sort of high value, and they were still popularizing the crops by the time the data collection was collected. So this was Irish potato in Jash, and just a bit of garlic in samri. But most of the value chains that there was a lot of attention in Ethiopia were livestock related. So looking at Kenya, we see quite a number actually producing. These are crops that have always, been produced by most of the households, the cowpeas, pigeon peas, mango, not so much, but then we see that most of them are producing. But when we look at the figure on my right, which is the number selling, we see that the percentage actually participating in terms of selling is very small. And this is related more to the value of output that is generated. If less is generated, less is sold, taken to the market. And then we see that again, few people are selling. So we don't see impact manifesting in terms of market participation, but that does not mean that there was not a change. It's just that what is produced is still too small to go to the market. So looking at the long-term indicators, again, we looked at various indicators of long-term to measure, long-term changes. These ones, again, are people-level impact. So we looked at if productivity increases, farmers are selling, and therefore they are expected to buy different types of food, and therefore they should be able to eat diverse diets. And this was an indicator that was asked, it was a 24-hour recall basis. So we looking at this dietary diversity index, we realize that we find that again here we see localized impacts for women. Actually, there are more women now eating more diverse food, actually more food for at least more than 4 food groups in Kenya only. The rest of the countries we didn't see this impact. But then again, there are also other indicators that could be used, but ideally these are also some of the impacts that take a long time to manifest. So again, this is also, it materializes differently. We don't see any change in food diversity in the entire sample, but we see for women in Kenya. And then in terms of poverty reduction, again, when we look at how much farmers have been able to increase their income so they can escape poverty, looking at just the head count on my left-hand side, we see actually, again, there was an increase, which is actually not significant, an increase in the number of people who could not access, or a decrease in the number of people living on more than $1.9 per day, especially in Kenya, and even in Mali. We see some increase in Niger, and in general, there's actually a decline. But then there's no impact. So the decline is general. I mean, it could have happened because of something else. Maybe it was just a bad year, or probably the harvests were not good or something. Again, when we use the multidimensional poverty index, this one looks at different aspects. We look at health, nutrition, education, and the living standards. This is a more accurate measure than we see the all more or less the same picture. There's no change in that. And then we know that most of our households, actually the farmers, the respondents, rely more on farming, and if they are not able to generate surplus, then we do not expect much change. But then again, that has also been proven that sometimes it takes much more to be able to get farmers out of poverty through agriculture. Now, we also looked at the extent to which women are now more empowered in terms of how they can make decisions. They have access, ownership, and control of resources, and how they control the income they have been generating. There were various interventions to just educate women on how they can save, how they can actually decide what they really want for themselves, and also taking a leadership role in the farmer groups. And the same, we also looked at resilience index, looking at just how resilient a household is, can withstand, the effects of maybe climate change or shocks. And again, there is also a mix for women empowerment. When we look at the general sample, we do not see any change, as you can see on my left. The box plots are just slightly above 0, and they are more or less the comparison. This is a change in the index for both comparison and intervention group. We don't see, much. They are almost overlapping, which means there is not much impact. And this we see even at the country level. But when we look at the different categories of, the gender groups, we see more of the change is in women, among women in Kenya and in Ethiopia again. And that is a significant improvement. So women tended to control resources, also make decisions, production decisions in Kenya and in Ethiopia. And in household resilience, this indicator was modified because we did not have the soil erosion and soil carbon, organic carbon indicators, so we modified the index. But still, again, even here we see these are indicators that are actually tied to the natural resource management that take a long time to manifest. So again, we don't see any significant impact here, but we could still unpack this and see which of the dimensions contribute more. But generally, so as a way of concluding, I would say that we probably would give some credit. This is a program that was implemented for effectively, I think, 2 years. There was a lot of trial at the beginning, at the inception phase, and then when we started in around 2016, there were lots of issues trying to understand the partners, how to work, and by the time the partners were getting to know each other and to be able to work together, we were already collecting end-line data and looking at the impact. So the fact that we see impacts on short-term indicators, changes in behavior, farmers now having confidence in the local government shows us. And even when, for some countries, for example, where we see dietary diversity changes and women becoming more empowered, I mean, that tells us that if given more time, we could probably see a lot more of the impacts in the NRM-related indicators. And we know that these take a lot of time. Sometimes, there are issues to do with enterprise switching, even if we intervened in terms of value chains. By the time farmers realize that there's actually market on mangoes, the time they plant the mangoes and the time they harvest takes quite some time, and the same applies to some of the enterprises that were selected. Again, also, I mean, it also requires a lot of time for farmers to also build confidence and the team to also be able to spread out. So I looking at the indicators, the short-term indicators, and some bit of changes in what I call the people-level indicators, we would probably say that given some time, we would see a lot more impacts in the welfare indicators. And I think that concludes. I hope I was not too brief. Hello?
Sorry, Judith, I was muted. Thank you so much for your presentation and also for saving us 2 minutes. I was trying to follow up on who is doing the financial presentation. We do not have the finance person here, but they have sent the presentation. Unfortunately, Caroline was supposed to do it and she's running out of network.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Solar, Pauline says you can talk about it. Are you able to do that?
Can I stop sharing?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Solar, are you able to do the finance?
Okay, I can do that. Do you have the final presentation?
I don't know I don't know whether this is final. Let me share what I can see on my screen. It was done this morning. It's dated this morning, so I think it's final.
Is it the one from me or you got another one?
Okay, where did this one come from now? From Caroline. Yes, it's from Caroline. Do you have a different one?
I updated.
She has just sent one.
Okay.
Okay.
If you are on email, she has just sent one. I think she was trying to make it look better. Have you accessed it?
Oh,
Okay.
the one that's been sent by Carol.
Yeah, I can go through that one.
Okay, you have that Solar, it was sent to you. So you want to open that one?
Yeah.
Okay, so go ahead then we have a quick one and then go into the questions. Sorry, people, keep recording your questions because I think this is going to take 1 or 2, at most 3 minutes, and then we can all now have the time to have the discussions. I also got a few questions that were shared through emails, so I'll be able to read through that. And great to see that some of them are from Lucy Massey, one of the PEC members. Sola is, okay, go ahead, Sola.
And that's okay?
Yes, we can see it.
And you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, let me try to do finance called is it multi-skilling, multidisciplinary? Yeah, I think we have alluded this in the first presentation. This was funded by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands, and there was a substantial funding that came from World Vision Australia that supported some activities in Ethiopia, in Kenya, and also at ICRAF. I don't think it's included in the slide, but it's good already to put that in the fore. And from The Hague, the funds were sent to ICRAF, from ICRAF to the national lead organizations, from the national lead organizations to the IPs. It's no longer 3-tier. I don't know how many tiers you see in the financial management system, and that has its own pros and cons on the efficiency, the cost effectiveness, and also the oversight. So it's really balancing oversight, but also efficiency and cost effectiveness. So almost 100% of the 49,000 has been spent. And you saw we were talking about delivery per country, and we have also talked about some impacts per country. Those deliveries and impacts were financed as shown in that table. So the funds we invested in different countries is not very, very much different. So all the countries received similar proportions of the funds, but different countries had different sizes of the consortium. Some had 3, some had 4, some had 7. What I thought would be more interesting is really to look at our delivery per work package vis-a-vis the amount spent in that work package. When we started planning, work package 1, 2, 3 were supposed to receive 20% of the funding. So 60% of the funding was supposed to go to work package 1, 2, 3. And I think even in the delivery, you can see that most of the delivery is really in work package 1, 2, 3. The interesting thing that I saw this morning was that actually work package 4 spent more money than work package 3. I found that very interesting. But I think really it was more about facilitating multi-stakeholder engagement, also facilitating post-harvest management, equipment access, and so on. So supporting farmers to build storage, make storage structures, and so on. So that's what was spent in program deliveries. Of that 49,000, 17,000 was delivered to the community in that fashion. So what did we learn from this multi-tier, multi-country, multi-sectorial, multi-partner fashion of financial management? And what did we do to make sure that oversight and efficiency is more or less balanced? So what we have there is that there was always collaboration between the NLOs and the implementing partners, as well as the lead partner, in terms of organizing and planning audits, both external and internal, to make sure that the accountability can be improved. We also have a common repository of documents, so they are easily accessible to everyone. But what we didn't really do well, we didn't have a dedicated finance resource person in the project. So I think in different levels, I think that's something that we learned. Have clear budget for the proposal stage tied to the activities right from the beginning. I think that was done very well. And with the center lead drawing contracts, close monitoring, frequent report and deliverables. This was really key, working with the NLOs. I know we had issues in some countries, but that collaboration between the lead partner, the NLO, tried to overcome some of those hurdles that we had. And of course, this 3-tier system makes sure that the donor requirements are really communicated to the bottom tier level, of course, with the time lag. That's what happens. And this clear understanding of what is the role of the NLO and the IP in terms of financial management and accountability and reporting on implementation. So those were the few lessons that FSU ICRAF would like to share with us.
Thank you so much, Sola. And ladies and gentlemen, we have 20 minutes to discuss a journey of 6 years that spent $50 million. We started as 35 participants, and now we are at 50, although I'm aware that 2 have left, so we'll be at 52 now. So it's quite a great interest that we have drawn here from staff of DryDev and others who are not staff of DryDev. And I think we are having a great time. So what I'm going to do is to open the floor for discussion, but in a guided way. For those who have joined late, my name is Jonathan Muriuki. I work here at ICRAF. And when I say here, it's because I am seated in my office, which I've been missing for the last 3 months. So I took this opportunity to come and check it out. I was asked to chair this, and I think it's not an easy thing. So I want to begin by apologizing right at the beginning that I may not be able to meet your expectations of making 50 people talk in the next 20 minutes. And for us to make sure as many people as possible can talk, then we need to be very brief on what we are sharing. Been seeing a lot of questions on the chat wall, and other questions were sent on email, and we'll be able to reach out and answer all those questions, some of them on this forum, and others will be answered later as we interact on email and as we share the presentation. So kindly feel free to keep on sending them over. Now, for those that will be fortunate enough to get to speak, I still don't know how I'll decide that, so kindly keep on raising your hand at the participation list so that I can be seeing the hands and giving the opportunity to do that. But once you get an opportunity, I will ask you to do one thing. First, if it is convenient, kindly put on the video so that we can see your face. But if you're in your bedroom and you've just woken up, we will understand. Just excuse yourself and say another time. Then when you put on your video, kindly introduce yourself by your name, where you work, and what your position over there is, and what your relationship with DryDev is, and then you can ask your question. At this point, we have heard from Sola that this project was financed by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Netherlands, with a significant contribution from World Vision Australia. So, and I can see Jan Eikop from the Ministry of Netherlands, Netherlands is on the call. So Jan, I'd like to put you on the spot and ask you to be a discussant for the next 2 minutes and ask and tell us if DryDev was value for money. Jan.
Yes, good morning, everybody. And hello to everybody that I know from the DryDev period. Yes, I think I have some observations, and the first one is, I think, if you look at the graphs that Sola presented so well, I have to say that I found the presentations really good, and even now, after how many months after the end of DryDev, I'm very happy that there is still this kind of possibility to learn lessons. What I see in the graph is that we really had this, it's a lesson for us also, because it's the way the project started with this rather long inception phase, and with this approach of quick wins. Retrospectively, you can say that it slowed down, in fact, starting up the program. And it took a very long time to get finally the program up and running. And I think that was, yeah, it was due to this approach of, maybe we started a bit too early with the program and should have made another step in formulating an operational plan before starting. So that's a lesson for us also as a donor. And then I have, I see in the what I understood of the presentation on the impact indicators. I don't see there's not so much, let's say, impact, but it's also a question if it is realistic to think that on this kind of indicators in a 3-year effective 3-year period you can reach impact. While, for instance, if you there are other things that influence the impact, like prices or climate. I mean, you simply need, if there is a bad rainy season in the Sahel, then your impact is dropping down immediately. So, this is another observation that I wanted to share. For the rest, I think we have a lot of lessons learned from the DryDev program, and as you know, we are at the moment busy through a subsidy tender procedure to develop a new program in the same field, in the same, let's say, in dryland agriculture in the Sahel. Okay, I will leave it to that at the moment. Yeah. Over.
Thank you so much, Jan. Again, I keep forgetting I'm muted, but I'm glad to know that first is we've been learning the lessons together with you. We know you walked the journey with you from almost the last 4 years of the program, and we have been able to appreciate all those lessons together. And also great to hear that you're tendering for a new program, and I believe most of these lessons are going to come into the new program, and we can make the drylands work. Rob Kerry is also on the call. Rob was playing a very interesting role. He was an implementer, and he was a co-financer. So once in a while, he used to step aside and think like a co-donor and then come back and help us work. Rob, it should be almost night in your place, but tell us what you think of the project.
Hi there, Jonathan. It's lovely to be with you and also with so many others who journeyed with us on DryDev. I'm leaving my camera off because indeed it's nice here. I'm sitting in my bedroom on a computer, but it's lovely to hear your warm voices from so far away. DryDev, it's just been lovely to see these impact assessment results. I agree with Jan, presented very clearly for us, and it's lovely to see lessons still being learned even after so long since the end of the program. I think as a kind of a, being kind of both implementing as well as supporting from a financial perspective, I would say World Vision Australia really appreciated the way that so many learned through the implementation of DryDev. We had so many terrific reflections, which have, I guess, improved our capacity, as individuals, but also as organisations, strengthened us in terms of our approach. And I would say the theory of change, or the construction of DryDev and the process of moving forward through natural resource management across into agricultural transformation and then into markets, has been something very much a learning journey for us as World Vision. So DryDev has been very instrumental, and I think continues to inform how we go forward, Jonathan. So we just appreciate so much all that ICRAF has done and the opportunity to participate so much. Thank you.
You're welcome, Rob, and we just request that you spend another 10 minutes with us before you start imagining to sleep, so that we can also get feedback from the rest of the people. I'm looking at the participant wall and I cannot see a raised hand. but I've got a few questions that have been raised, especially from Salamatu. To Judith, what are the findings of the evaluation concerning innovation platform in Niger? And can you clarify the low access to extension services in Niger? Is it from government agents or from community extension services put in place by DryDev? Also asking why the results of that diversification are low in Ethiopia. We expected to have a good result due to the potential of production and diversification. So if Judith could take up those ones, and then we can pick up others. Judith?
Yeah, yeah, I read the questions already. I will start with the results of the evaluation. Well, we evaluated these innovation platforms indirectly because the theory was that the innovation platforms were actually to improve, farmer interaction so that they can access, support services like extension, for example. So the evaluation we have done is to look at whether this, extension, this program delivery approach was able to increase farmers' access to extension. So we actually don't see that manifesting, and strangely enough, it's only in Niger where we don't see an improvement in access to extension. And then we already saw a challenge at the beginning in restructuring the innovation platforms. Of course, we know from other studies that innovation platforms do work, but there are also various reasons. I mean, there were also issues with the partnership and that could have affected, access. And it also depends very much on how these innovation platforms were organized. So if they do not talk to people, they do not get, that multiplier effect is very low. We then actually wouldn't see much, even though within the groups there might be interaction, but if that interaction is not spread out, we won't see. So the statistics tell us that actually it didn't work, but that does not mean that it is not something that cannot work. It can still work, we just need a bit of restructuring. In other countries where they didn't have innovation platforms, they had different approaches. They had a more interactive, like farmer to farmer, for example. And also it needed a lot of also working closely with the institutions that are existing, like maybe government institution if it is there. So in such countries, we see an improvement. We remember the network there is a map in Burkina Faso, for example. We remember more farmer to farmer working closely with the county government here in Kenya and working with the Woreda government in Ethiopia. So we could see such changes. Now, we did evaluate, in short, we did evaluate that, but indirectly looking at whether it improved access to extension. But if there's need to just, study the innovation platforms, and how it affects intervention, access to extension, we can still do that. Now, in Ethiopia, strangely enough, well, there was, we know that when you talk about dietary diversity, we are looking at consumption of different food groups. So, well, maybe productivity might increase. It did increase, yes, we see in both the sites, in comparison and the intervention sites, but then that was not, the change was so small, not significant. But then again, there's also another layer that would need to improve, dietary diversity. So farmers could, the households, the respondents could probably just be consuming a lot more of one food group. So even if they increased more production of maybe starch, for example, and they do not have access to other food groups like proteins or so that's what we see in Ethiopia. So ideally, the lesson we learn is that even as much as we are talking about food security, we need to go further beyond just production, but we also talk about other utilization. I think we talked more on access. So maybe that's the next level for Ethiopia now. And was there any other question other than that?
Yes, Judith, but I'll come back to you shortly. I would like to just share my screen right now because initially there were no questions for solar, but I can see they're coming up. Just to get some of the webinar questions that have been sent from that had been sent from on the email, and then we should be able to answer them, and I'll direct them to Sola. I don't know that you can see my screen. I can't even see it myself.
It's really tiny.
I don't know what happened to it. It just disappeared on me. So let me try to make it bigger. Is that better?
No.
Sola, do you want to take this up? There are 3 questions, but they are short, I think. Hello, Sola.
Probably,
Yeah,
Jonathan, you may want to minimize one screen because I'm seeing a multiple screens shared from your end. Jonathan, kindly check on that.
It was supposed to be one shared, so let me stop sharing and share again. Can you see that now?
No.
Yes, from my end.
Sola, go ahead.
Yeah, it's clear.
Okay. The first one. Yeah, I removed the slide that actually speaks to this point. The approach that we took in DryDev was evidence-based policy influencing, and as I said, most of the evidence synthesis was towards the end of the project. So what we did, we packaged a lot of that different what has worked where, how it could work better, and we engaged 350 scaling stakeholders. Those 350 included policymakers who could use it for decision making. For instance, I know that here in Kenya, some of the county governments used our information to think around how they are programming. So already, yeah, I couldn't say we made different scenarios and so on, but we had some information that we decision makers could use to respond to some of the needs of the people in the drylands, which would not have been there otherwise. And then, can you go down? The question on trees. Yes, we have a lot of that information on the trees, which species and where and how we improved survival, so we could share after this meeting. It's in different places, so we could refer you to different sources. In terms of the quality of material, most of this material was actually sourced from ICRAF and the other national research centers that had materials in the different countries, but also ICRAF provided some of the templates. I think we can provide some of that. In terms of survival, I think that's a very interesting point. In Ethiopia, where we were working, the survival of trees was around 20%, and we actually increased that to 58, in some cases to 91%, by just tweaking and improving soil and water management. So we could also share that, and I think this similar work was done in Mali and Kenya as well, and we can share how that was improved. I think we have talked to Lucy's questions. I think in the lessons learned I presented, I think we spoke to that I think meticulous partner selection is very important. You want to balance capacity of the partner, their ability, their willingness to adapt, but also you also want to look at their delivery mechanism and how robust they are in terms of reaching the farm. There are some partners that don't interface with the farmer, yet your intervention wants to interface with the farmer. So really knowing your partner at the beginning is very important. How they deliver, how they are structured, and their principles. But also resourcing the partner and resourcing at the right time is important. I remember in DryDev, we always say, resources, relationships will give you results. So knowing your partner and how to relate within the consortium, resourcing them is also very important. But I think we touched on that already. And the legal funding, I think on the research is a lesson learned for eCraft engaging in a project with the legal funding, but also for the program and the donor as well. If you want to facilitate evidence generation and integrate it within the project, that has to be accompanied by adequate funding. So I think that has been captured, and I think we've discussed it over the years as well. Is there another one?
On the chat wall, yes. So there is a question for you.
Yeah, I can answer the last two.
Yes, I needed you to answer from Jerome and combine that with Malesu. And then Judith is going to answer about LKS, and then after that we'll close. So you see the question?
I wish Anna Maria was on this call. As DryDev, we really looked at different options for ensuring inclusion and especially gender mainstreaming. We thought the household methodology would be one way of building confidence and leveling the playing field to bring in women and our vulnerable households. But then the household methodology needed not just more funding, but more staff. Because we had fewer people in the field, it was difficult for them to engage in that intensive engagement. So a household methodology is where you actually want a household to sit down and plan around their resources, and plan on how they allocate their resources, and plan around how they want to use and benefit from their resources, and how they engage at the community landscape level. And you bring that as well at community landscape level. So for you to really facilitate that effectively, you need more engagement, and that needs more time, and that needs more human and financial resources. So we think if that's integrated even in the new DryDev or other drylands program, I think it will be a game changer. Most of these drylands, people have not been involved a lot in this development project, and they need more concerted, targeted engagement to bring to the fore. And yeah, we didn't disaggregate our gender data a lot. Some countries try to put in youth, women, and men, and also the work classes and so on. That was clumsily done, I would say. It wasn't really standardized and systematically done across the project. So really, that's why our gender delivery was not so up to scratch to really say each partner is required to deliver in this way, make sure you segregate and so on. But I know most of the women were married. Some of them were coming with their husbands, some of them were not, but I think that could be done better.
Thank you, Sola. So Judith, if you could take the LKS question from Alice as we come to a close.
Okay. Yeah, well, we did actually have lots of useful lessons from the load quality assurance sampling methodology we used to review progress. And I'm glad to say that, well, at the time we did a progress or the uptake survey, so to speak, in 2017. I mean, there were lots of changes that took place. I mean, we took partners through the process, we discussed the results together, we tried to understand areas where there were problems that needed to be addressed. For example, we realized that in, the technologies that needed a lot of resources. For example, water harvesting, not many of the farmers were taking it up, so this also got the team into thinking, and there were also some bit of resourcing, financing, fundraising here and there with Malesu's team to try and increase access, also trying to change some of the, get into looking at some of the low cost kind of water harvesting technologies that could be promoted. And even through some of those lessons showed us that actually women were tended to take up some of the technologies that were probably less resource constraining, less labor, So I mean, through that we try to advise the implementing teams and changes were made. Even in the program delivery, for example, for Kenya, we realized that the approach they were using at the beginning, relying more on the county government extension, wasn't working, so they needed to change and, sort of reorganize. I remember Sola and the team sort of reorganized the farmer groups in a way that they were now able to effectively reach out to the farmer training approach, or farmer extension approach, so they were able to reach more farmers. So, those are some of the reflections. So it was an important, learning, but what we realized that it's actually quite cumbersome to do it every year. So, there have been discussions whether it's really necessary to do this every year, or maybe to think of it as some sort of mid-term kind of evaluation or midline evaluation. But, it generated a lot of lessons and a lot of, the teams had a lot of enthusiasm to adapt their way of managing the program or the interventions, so to speak. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Judith. Unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, I'm gonna have to bring this to a close, but I'm gonna ask at least that we hear from West Africa and at least from one of the other partners of DryDev. If Peter Wright, I will put you on the spot and give you just a minute to give a perspective of DryDev performing in the Sahel, and then we bring this to a close. And while you are at that, kindly remember to give some big thank you to the DGIS and also World Vision Australia. Peter.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. And thank you for DGIS. And thank you, eCraft, and thank you, World Vision Australia. I think everybody put a lot of effort together to make this program work. I used to tell people that if I could design a program exactly as I would like to see it myself, that it would have been very close to what DryDev put together. I think it was a very good program. We took a lot of time at the start getting things up and running. I don't think that was useless time. In Niger, we spent a lot of time working with local groups, getting them organized into their platforms and whatnot, and getting really to know each other and get an idea of what people really wanted to do. One of the things that, there was a question, I think, from Lucy about getting local partners on board. I think one of the challenges of this project was the fact that it was farmer-driven. It was supposed to be a farmer-driven project, and that's kind of a new ball game for most people. And you're working with people who have invariably worked in other projects in other places, and they've generally been very much top-down sorts of interventions, and people are used to just doing things the way they're used to doing them. And that was a challenge to get people to change their mindsets on how this project would work. In terms of the Sahel, I think certainly the numbers supported as well. Just the activities for water security were very important and received a lot of engagement, and I think produced a lot of good results in the Sahel. I have to say our visit to Ethiopia, to that watershed that was featured in the pictures, was very stimulating, and it's the kind of thing that anyone dealing with watersheds loves to see, that sort of development of the water infiltration on the upper slopes coming out at the lower slopes, making better use of it, controlling grazing and whatnot. That's the kind of thing you can do in a very small watershed. We don't have those sorts of watersheds for the most part in the Sahel. Some of them are in fact very difficult to identify because of sandy soils and very strong infiltration. You don't even get a lot of surface water moving about. I think you gave me 5 minutes to talk about that, and I think I would stop there. I would just say one thing about the evaluation. We haven't seen it up close to be able to really dig into it. Some of the figures indicate, if I'm not mistaken, that the comparison households actually were performing significantly better than the intervention households at the start of the intervention, which seemed to me a little unusual. And probably we need to better understand those sort of factors. Why were they actually performing better when there's supposedly a kind of a comparison? And that lets me think that possibly the closeout figures are also need a lot of introspection to really understand the nuances in them, whether there are significant differences or not. But some of them there also seem to indicate that the comparison households were performing better than the intervention ones. And that intuitively doesn't seem right. There's probably a lot of factors in there that we don't understand, maybe never will understand. It tells me that this type of comparison is really delicate and really needs a lot of attention. Okay, thank you, Jonathan. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Peter. And I think at this point, after having done 1 hour and 40 minutes, it is good to bring this to a close. So those that are on the other side of the eastern side of the world, good night. Those that are waking up on the western side of the world, enjoy your day. Those that are in the eastern side, enjoy your lunch. And let's meet in the next DryDev, whichever shape it is going to take, because we think we've just started on a good journey, and it is just at the very beginning. It's a long journey to go with our farmers and communities. Bye-bye. You may feel free to put on your videos as you exit, and exit at your own pleasure.
Thank you all. All the best in the drylands.